The first great clash on this list, Greece versus Persia, wasn't inevitable. Persia was the dominant power on Earth. Greece was a collection of quarreling city-states that couldn't agree on anything, except for one crucial decade. What followed was worse. Greece had saved itself from Persia. Then it destroyed itself. Athens and Sparta spent 27 years dismantling the civilization they had just defended. Athens surrendered in 404 BC, its long walls torn down to the sound of flute music. A generation later, a 20-year-old Macedonian king crossed into Asia and refused to stop. And 60 years after that, a Carthaginian general crossed the Alps with war elephants and came within a single decision of ending Rome. Rome's later wars were mostly Rome fighting Rome. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Octavian defeated Antony. The Republic became an empire, one civil war at a time. The Jewish-Roman War of 66 AD produced one of history's most consequential aftermaths. Rome crushed the rebellion, burned the temple, and scattered a people across the known world. The diaspora that followed lasted nearly 2,000 years. In 865, the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok arrived in England, not to raid, but to conquer. They dismantled 3 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms in 13 years. The only thing that stopped them was a man named Alfred, not because he won every battle, but because he survived long enough to win the right one. 200 years later, England's identity changed in a single afternoon. Harold was dead by nightfall at Hastings. Within a generation, the English language had been driven underground. The First Crusade was the most improbable military success in medieval history. An army of peasants, knights, and true believers marched 3,000 miles and took Jerusalem. When they entered the city, they massacred nearly every inhabitant, Muslim, Jewish, and Eastern Christian alike. The streets ran with blood for days. God, they said, had willed it. The Fourth Crusade never reached the Holy Land at all. It stopped in Constantinople and sacked it instead. The greatest Christian city in the world, destroyed by fellow Christians. The Mongol invasion of Europe in 1241 came closer to erasing Western civilization than anything before or since. Hungary collapsed in days. Poland burned. The Mongols reached the Adriatic and looked west. Then the Great Khan died in Mongolia. The commanders rode east to elect a new ruler. Europe was not saved by its armies. It was saved by a funeral 10,000 miles away. The 100 Years' War was not one war. It was 5 generations of the same argument. Who owned France, interrupted by plagues, famines, and a teenage girl from a village in Lorraine who briefly changed the answer. On May 29, 1453, a 21-year-old sultan rode through the gates of Constantinople into the Hagia Sophia. The last Roman emperor had died fighting in the streets hours earlier. An empire that had outlasted Rome by 1,000 years ended in a single morning. The conquests of the Americas were not primarily military victories. They were biological ones. Cortés had 600 men. What he had in greater numbers was smallpox. The Dutch fought Spain for 80 years and won. What makes that remarkable is not the victory, it's what they built while fighting. The Dutch Republic became the wealthiest society on earth, while simultaneously resisting the most powerful empire in history. They won the war and invented modern capitalism at the same time. Spain sent the Armada in 1588 with God's blessing and 130 ships. The English scattered the fleet with fire ships in the Channel, forcing them north around Scotland and Ireland. The storms off the Irish coast destroyed what English cannon had not. Of 130 ships, fewer than 70 returned. The 30 Years' War began with 3 men thrown from a window in Prague and ended with the Peace of Westphalia, the document that created the modern concept of the sovereign nation-state. Before it, Europe was a tangle of overlapping religious and dynastic claims. After it, borders had meaning. The English Civil War produced the first public execution of a reigning monarch in European history. Charles I was tried by his own parliament, convicted, and beheaded on a cold January morning in 1649. The crowd went silent when the axe fell. The 7 Years' War deserves to be called a world war before the term existed. It was fought across 5 continents. Britain emerged dominant. France lost Canada and India in the same treaty. Frederick the Great of Prussia survived 3 simultaneous invasions by refusing to accept that he had lost. The American Revolution was not supposed to succeed. A colonial militia, badly equipped and frequently unpaid, defeated the most professional army in the world. It took 8 years, a French alliance, and 1 very cold night on the Delaware River. The Haitian Revolution is the only successful slave revolt in recorded history. The enslaved people of Saint-Domingue defeated the French army, the Spanish army, the British army, and yellow fever, in that order. Haiti declared independence in 1804. France demanded reparations. Haiti paid them until 1947. Napoleon conquered most of Europe in 10 years. Then he invaded Russia. He reached Moscow and found it burning. The Russians had set their own city on fire rather than hand it to him intact. The retreat that followed killed more of his soldiers than any battle. Cold, starvation, and Cossack raids reduced his Grande Armée from 600,000 men to fewer than 100,000 survivors. Waterloo finished what the Russian winter had started. The American Civil War killed more Americans than every other war in United States history combined. It was fought over whether 4 million people would remain enslaved. The Paraguayan War is the most catastrophic conflict in the history of the Americas, and almost no one outside Latin America knows it happened. Paraguay declared war on Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. By the time it ended in 1870, 60% of the country's total population was dead, 90% of adult men. Paraguay sent boys into the final battles, some as young as 12, with painted beards, so the enemy wouldn't realize what they were shooting at. Bismarck engineered the Franco-Prussian War by editing a telegram. He needed France to declare war on Prussia, not the other way around. France obliged. Napoleon III was captured at Sedan 6 weeks later. The German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. France lost Alsace-Lorraine. The British invented the concentration camp to win the Boer War. Barbed wire enclosures, where Boer civilian families were held in conditions so poor that 26,000 women and children died of disease. Britain won the territory and lost the moral argument it had always made about why empire was justified. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 shattered one of the 19th century's foundational assumptions, that European powers could not be defeated by Asian ones. Japan sank Russia's Baltic Fleet after it had sailed 18,000 miles to reach the battle. A young naval officer named Isoroku Yamamoto watched from a Japanese warship. 37 years later, he planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. The First World War was not supposed to last 4 years. Every army went in expecting a short, decisive campaign. What they got instead was industrial slaughter on a scale no one had imagined, and no one had a plan to stop. The Russian Civil War killed 10 million people, more than the First World War killed Russians. It was fought by Reds, Whites, Greens, anarchists, and 14 foreign armies. The Bolsheviks won not because they were strongest, but because everyone else was more divided. The Chaco War between Bolivia and Paraguay is one of history's most pointless conflicts. Bolivia believed the Gran Chaco contained oil and fought 3 years to take it. Paraguay fought 3 years to keep it. 100,000 men died. The Chaco had no oil. The Spanish Civil War was the 20th century's most thoroughly documented dress rehearsal. Germany tested the Stuka. The Soviet Union tested political interference. The world watched and drew the wrong conclusions from almost everything it saw. The Second World War killed between 70 and 85 million people. No previous conflict in human history had come close. When Britain withdrew from India in 1947, it partitioned the subcontinent into 2 nations along religious lines: Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. 15 million people were forced to cross the new border in both directions. It was the largest mass migration in human history, and it was accompanied by massacres that killed up to 1 million people. Kashmir became a war within weeks. The ceasefire line drawn in 1949 is still there. Both countries call it temporary. The Korean War ended in 1953, exactly where it had started, at the 38th parallel. The armistice was signed in the rain at a village called Panmunjom. It has never been replaced by a peace treaty. The 2 Koreas remain technically at war today. The Algerian War lasted 8 years because France refused to call it a war. Algeria was not a colony, it was France. 1 million dead. 1 million settlers expelled. The war destroyed 4 French governments. France had already tried to hold Vietnam for 9 years and failed, defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Withdrawing the same year the United States began its involvement. The Americans watched France lose and decided they would do it differently. They didn't. The last helicopter left the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon on April 29, 1975. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December 1979, expecting a stabilization operation. They left 10 years later. The Mujahideen who drove them out were funded by the CIA and included a Saudi construction heir named Osama bin Laden. The United States would return to Afghanistan 22 years later to fight the consequences of its own success. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 years and accomplished nothing. 1 million dead. No borders changed. Both sides declared victory. The Falklands War was decided by special forces in the freezing South Atlantic dark. Argentina had calculated that Britain was too distracted and too far away to respond. Thatcher sent a task force 8,000 miles the next day. The Bosnian War placed Sarajevo under siege for 1,425 days, longer than the Nazi siege of Leningrad during World War II, which had itself been the longest siege of a major city in modern history. In July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces executed 8,000 men and boys from Srebrenica over 5 days. It was the worst atrocity in Europe since 1945, and it happened while UN peacekeepers watched. The Rwandan genocide killed 800,000 people in 100 days. The UN withdrew its forces as the killing began. The United States declined to use the word genocide because using it would have required a response. The killing stopped, not because the world intervened, but because one side won the war. The United States went to Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban. Both goals were achieved within months. Then the mission expanded, the timeline extended, and the definition of success blurred until no one could articulate what winning would look like. 20 years later, the Taliban walked back into Kabul. The Afghan government the US had spent $2 trillion building collapsed in 11 days. The Iraq War began with a certainty that was wrong. The weapons of mass destruction were not there. What followed was a decade of insurgency that killed 200,000 civilians and created the conditions in which ISIS emerged. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched the largest land invasion in Europe since 1945, expecting Ukraine's government to flee and its army to dissolve within days. The final card for this war is blank. Because this one isn't over yet.